Hello and welcome to Thinking Outside the Box, Solutions to Produce Better Gender Data. I'm Megan O'Donnell. I'm a Policy Fellow and Assistant Director for Gender at the Center for Global Development, and I'm very pleased to be hosting today's conversation alongside our colleagues at Open Data Watch and Data2X. Our three organizations have worked closely with one another over the years on raising the importance of not just the collection, but also the use of gender data to enable us to better track progress on global gender equality. Most recently through our learning collaborative on women's economic empowerment measurement. And we'll drop a link on YouTube for those of you who are interested in learning more about that collaborative work. Today's event is going to launch ODW and Data2X's new report, Transforming the Data Landscape, Solutions to Close Gender Data Gaps. And it will also feature a discussion of experts exploring the gender data limitations they've encountered in their work across sectors and geographies, as well as the solutions that they've harnessed to address these gaps and limitations. You all will have a chance to share your questions and comments with our panelists during the event. So please do pop those into the comment section on YouTube, tweet at us at CGDev, or email us at events@cgdev.org with those comments and questions. And we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible during our discussion section. But first, to start us off, I'm going to turn to Emily Corey-Pryor, who is Executive Director of Data2X, for her opening remarks, contextualizing this important work. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks so much, Megan, and thanks to all of our listeners who are joining us in this virtual room. I'm so pleased to be here, and we're so pleased to be working together with CGD and Open Data Watch to host this event. So as Megan said, I'm Emily Corey-Pryor. I'm Executive Director of Data2X, and we're a civil society organization and global gender data alliance that advocates for the production and use of gender data to drive progress on both gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals. It's my honor to be a part of this event as we think outside of the box on solutions for producing better gender data. In a time of urgent and overlapping crises, the focus of this conversation on solutions feels particularly relevant. It is a time to focus not necessarily on what is missing, but also on what is actionable. For Data2X, that balance between reflection and action is a guiding force, really, as we celebrate our 10th anniversary. In this last decade, in close partnership with all of you, we've worked together to shine a light on gender data and to make it more prominent, better understood as key for illuminating the lived realities of women and girls, and therefore as an essential part of equitable progress. By mapping gender data gaps across key development areas together, we've created a movement for gender data. In so many ways then, today's event and the launch of this report, Transforming the Data Landscape, Solutions to Close Gender Data Gaps, a new joint effort and report between Open Data Watch and Data2X, represents the culmination of our efforts and the strength of the foundation that we stand on even as challenges persist. Data gaps remain, the policy environment is imperfect, and the need for more and better coordinated investment in gender data has not diminished. But we are all optimists, and this report also shows that progress is possible, that existing data is under-leveraged, and that there are concrete policy solutions for building more resilient gender data systems and communities. I'm especially proud that this report and its associated inventory will be a key component of the State of Gender Data, which is a signature initiative of Data2X's anniversary year. Launching this summer, the State of Gender Data will provide a snapshot of gender data progress to date, highlight viable data and policy solutions, and track forward-looking momentum, including key gender data commitments. Most importantly, we hope the State of Gender Data will be a meeting point and a catalyst to bring together stakeholders from every sector to drive further action on gender data. In just a moment, I'll be turning to my very dear colleague, Sheda Badi, who's Managing Director of Open Data Watch, to provide an overview of the report findings, highlighting proven solutions in health, education, economic opportunity, the environment, political participation, and human security, as well as across all domains. So this has been no mean feat, I promise you. But first, before we turn to Shada, I want to pull out 6 recommendations that speak most to this moment and the opportunity before us. We must increase smart investments in gender data systems, expand collaborative efforts to champion gender data collection, analysis, and use, deploy rapid data collection methods to better monitor underreported issues, ensure gender data are open and easily accessible to increase their value through use and reuse, and invest in data training and data literacy to build capacity. Finally, and most critically, what our own experience over these last 10 years and what this report, Transforming the Data Landscape, makes clear is that whether it's integrating modules on asset ownership into household surveys, using OpenMS, or harnessing tools for policy data integration, these solutions require the engagement of a diverse range of stakeholders for them to be relevant and sustainable. We know that this is an ambitious agenda. These 6 things are not easy to achieve, but I believe deeply in the ability of all of the people gathered around this virtual table to make this happen. Welcome once again. I hope you will continue to be partners with us in driving a new phase of gender data advocacy that looks beyond gaps to put gender data at the heart of policymaking, long-term sustainability, and resilience. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Emily, for energizing us and getting us started with those very clear and ambitious and necessary recommendations. Now, as you mentioned, we're going to turn it over to Shada Badi, the Managing Director of Open Data Watch and Senior Advisor to Data 2X, to walk us through the key findings and recommendations of the report. Shada.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. And thanks a lot, Emily, for setting the scene for us. And a warm welcome to all our audience. We've just been very encouraged with the number of registered, over 100 people have registered for this event. So it's really encouraging to see that talking about data and talking about gender data is really bringing us together. And thanks for the co-host, of course, CGD, for hosting us. On behalf of the research team in ODW and also Data2X, I'm really delighted to be briefing you on this report that we're launching today, Solutions to Produce Better Gender Data. It's been a lot of work, over 1 year of work. There is a thick report. There's a lot of information in there. So, and I have only a few minutes, so I'll take you to a few slides to summarize the findings and recommendations. And also wanted to thank, by the way, a lot of our peer reviewers and also people who helped us and answered the surveys. You know, we asked a lot of questions. We went around to many of the stakeholders. So many people are to be acknowledged and thanked for this work. Next slide. On gender data gaps, we've all talked about it and we're going to hear more, of course. But, you know, the point here is that despite decades of investment in promoting gender equality, gender data gaps continue to impede our understanding of the lived experience of women and girls. These gaps for me represent what we do not know. And what we do not, and when we do not know, we cannot address gender inequalities. So it's really paramount for us to come together to close these gaps. To introduce the report, next slide. That's why we at the ODW and Data2X, we took an initiative. For many years, we've been talking about identifying gender data problems. So the initiative now has been changing the focus more on finding practical solutions to gender data gaps. We know where the gaps are, and we're going to hear more today of the really critical gaps, but what are some of the solutions? So this new report is a culmination of a year of research and extensive peer reviews focusing on innovative approaches, matching solutions to problems with the hope that the acquired knowledge will encourage uptake and effective use of data. Next slide. So our new report and its accompanying gender data inventory. This is an extensive inventory that you can download from the website right now, but later on this summer, Data2X is going to have it in a much more user-friendly way as a microsite available on their website. Documents 142 unique solutions that have emerged in the last 5 years across 7 areas of development: economic opportunities, education, environment, health, human security, public participations, and of course, cross-domain solutions which span across the previous categories. In fact, many of these solutions fit into more than one development area, which is why you see a larger number of total number of 189, but 142 is really the unique gender data solutions. We are data people, so we have to be accurate about the numbers. Next slide. Some examples of solutions. There's a lot in the inventory, and then for the report, we have taken highlights of the different solutions. And then for each highlight of the solution, we also talk about what does it take to reach that solution. And in addition, if you actually do that, then what's in it? What is the outcome? What is the expected outcome? So we methodically gone through all the solutions and how to implement it and what is the impact of it. A few examples. On economic opportunity side, the highlighted solution that we have selected is the one that UN Statistics Division and UN Women working together through a project called Evidence and Data for Gender Equality to develop better guidelines and also to be able to integrate modules and asset ownership to household surveys. This is very promising in terms of the data that would be produced to help policy makers address women's economic empowerment. These guidelines are being actually used to monitor SDG 5, for those of you who know indicators, 5.8.1 on sex disaggregated land tenure, and have also been further operationalized in the LSMS Plus program. I hope Jera would tell us more later. On the health side, even though the idea of verbal autopsies are not necessarily new, the last few years and the COVID-19 pandemic have renewed the importance of these tools to assist civil registration and vital statistic systems. For example, in Nigeria, verbal autopsies have been used to estimate causes of death, childhood deaths, and in Chad and Liberia, verbal autopsies are being used to collect causes of death information from next of kin during the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are sort of tried and tested solutions that we have highlighted that we think could be really scaled up and used elsewhere. In education, we're going to hear from David Evans, expert in this area. OpenEMIS, which is really conceived, OpenEMIS is conceived to be a sort of a restriction-free or royalty-free software for countries to use, is a potential replacement for outdated education systems that may be costly to update and a solution for countries that still lack electronic record keeping. In the last 10 years, in fact, over 10 countries, including some small island developing states, have launched OpenEMIS initiatives to address gender gaps in education and to support data collection, analysis, dissemination, and even sort of evidence-based planning in the education sector. So it's really a promising solution. Be happy to hear what David thinks about these solutions that we have highlighted. So again, we've heard and seen these solutions before, but what is unique here is that we know where they are being implemented and by whom. Next slide, cross-domain. So several solutions cut across all 6 development areas and bolster the production of gender data for all. This includes a few examples here we have. One is on training and employing female enumerators to collect gender sensitive data. Another one is using rapid gender assessment in time of health, environmental, and humanitarian crisis, and complementing official statistics with big data, very popular field for social or social media analysis. We also note household surveys as a strong potential solution. Jero will be happy to hear that, for filling gender data gaps. Historically, they've not been producing enough gender data, but fortunately, work is underway to make them more specific to gender data collection. We will hear more on that, of course. Next slide on enabling environment. In addition to the solutions that close gender data gaps by improving data production, this report also identifies solutions that do so by creating an enabling environment for gender data to thrive. These actions span from sustainable financing, one of my favorite topics, also Emily mentioned, to open data, another favorite topic, and are critical for long-term change. We will hear both from our panelists on how open data and data literacy specifically spur impact. Not only do they encourage gender data, these factors that we're talking about in the enabling environment, not only they encourage the gender data use and update, but the solutions that we are suggesting also aim to strengthen the linkage between data and policy. This is a big goal that we in data field have for producing data that's used and also data that's linked to policy and is used for decision making. So next, I mentioned to you that financing is one of my favorite topics, so I have to have a slide on this. And because it's important, because all these outline solutions, whether it is to be creating an enabling environment or an innovation to fill gender data gaps, require funding. Financing gender data remains a large focus of both Data2X and ODW's work, but also in partnership with Paris 21 and our colleagues at the World Bank. Here we highlight an ongoing solution called the Clearinghouse for Financing Development Data, an initiative of the Bern Network that aims to increase the transparency of financial flows for statistics to better match the supply and demand side of financing for gender data. We encourage those of you who haven't seen this to explore it and particularly look at the gender channel on the Clearinghouse and give us feedback. So next slide is, of course, as is, you can imagine, and Emily covered this very well, is the implementation of these identified solutions, whether they produce more gender data or create an enabling environment to do so, cannot fall only to gender data focal points or ministries of finance, ministries of social welfare or gender. I was thinking of Ministry of Finance is an important player in this. They require partnership by a range of actors working together to close gaps and strengthen gender data system. This is particularly underscored by this report and the research that we have done, finding that as nearly almost every solution identified requires multiple actors for successful implementation, as you see here on this slide, and there is more in the report to cover. So finally, our last slide, my last slide, is there are recommendations or actions to go forward and to ensure that this report does, in fact, move the conversation from identifying problems to scaling solutions. We are coming up with these 10 priority actions that some of them was mentioned also by Emily, that governments, and we hope that governments and international communities should take to help catalyze urgent progress on gender data gaps. I will not read through them, but I wanted to mention two of them which are particularly important and may not be discussed at length today. And one is action 4, which is strengthening core administrative system to create permanent infrastructure. And the other one is action 9, which is really moving much more into making data open and accessible. And unfortunately, gender data is one of the categories that lags behind other categories of data in openness and accessibility. So we hope we can do some work on that. So I'd like to close by last slide to show you that we have a lot of resources available for you to use as based on this research and the work that we have done. We have done a summary of the report that you can explore. You can read the report, you can download the inventory and give us feedback, and really look forward to discussions by the panelists and feedback from you, our audience, on what do you think about the report and how we can improve, work together to improve the quality and accessibility of gender data. Thank you. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Shada, for that comprehensive overview. It starts us off with a really strong foundation. The recommendations you've highlighted, the wide range of 142 different solutions that are out there to harness. Really encourage our audience today to go into the report and have a read through those in more detail. And what we're going to do now is allow for a deeper dive into our panelists' lines of work in specific sectors, thematic areas, working with different data collection tools, and get a sense for the different solutions that they are harnessing in their own work. We're going to start off with David Evans, my colleague, a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. Dave, you have done a lot of work evaluating programs that aim to improve children's education outcomes. Can you tell us a bit about what your research has revealed regarding countries' collection and use of gender-specific education data, and what solutions are currently being implemented to better understand how we can improve girls' education outcomes? Over to you.
Thanks so much, Megan. It is a pleasure to be here. That's a great question. I just want to start out by saying one of the things that I love about this report that Shada just shared is this focus on solutions. It's so easy with data and with other development questions just to focus on problems, and much more challenging to propose constructive solutions that countries are actually putting in place. And this report has more than 140 of those, which is just fabulous. So per your question, I'll just say a little bit about challenges that countries and their partners face, as well as the solutions that we observe happening around the world. So a lot of this draws on analysis in a forthcoming report on girls' education that Shelby Carvalho and I have been leading, which will come out in just a few weeks. So coming soon to the CGD website, which is hopefully near you. So to start with challenges, I think it's important to understand where we're at in terms of girls' education data. So an important piece is that many countries lack even basic data on girls' educational outcomes, right? So if we think about girls' education, a lot of things matter for girls' education, right? How accessible the schools are, how gender sensitive curricula might be, lots of different elements. But we have to start with just knowing whether girls are in school, how far they're getting in school. So what this figure shows us is the number of countries that over the course of a 5-year period don't report any data on very basic educational outcomes. So you can see that it's a relatively small number of countries. And so the white bars are middle income countries and the darker shaded bars are low income countries. What you can see here is that, relatively few countries lack data on primary school enrollment, primary school completion. Relatively few is not zero, right? You still have nearly a quarter of low income countries that aren't even monitoring primary completion rate, how many girls get through elementary school. And you might think, well, that's because, that doesn't affect a lot of girls. Well, in low income countries, only a little more than 2 out of 3 girls actually complete primary school. So it's not like we've finished the battle for universal primary education. And you can see see these numbers are much higher for lower secondary schools. So how many girls are making it into lower secondary school? Completion rates are reported, are missing for more than 30% of countries. Secondary school enrollment, overall secondary school enrollment, almost half of countries that's missing if you look at the bottom bar. So there are a lot of countries where we're missing even basic data. And I'll circle back to the solution that Shada talked about education management information systems, which is what we use to calculate these very basic data. So, you know, there are a lot of things we care about from when it comes to education. One of the most important things, not the only important thing, but one of the most important things is whether or not the kids are actually learning, whether or not girls are learning when they're in school. And if we look at one effort to survey the vast array of learning assessments across countries, which is the World Bank's Harmonized Learning Outcomes, you can see this is the number. What this figure shows is for different countries at different levels of income, the number of assessments that the World Bank was able to track down over a 17-year period. So over the course of 17 years, you can see in high-income countries, you know, across all subjects, most high-income countries have an assessment almost every year. So 14.5 assessments on average. There are no half assessments, I hope, over the course of 17 years. But you can see if we go to upper middle income country, that number drops to about 9 assessments. If we go to low income countries on average, we're able to find learning assessments for girls in just 2 assessments on average over the course of 17 years. So it is impossible to gauge how girls are doing in school if we don't measure it, right? We don't want to mistake the measurement for the things that we care about, but if we don't measure whether girls are learning, if we don't measure whether girls are learning how to do math, whether they're reading, then there's no way we'll be able to tell whether our education systems are succeeding or failing girls. Now, just the simple statistics also aren't enough. And so a lot of countries lack deeper analysis of girls' education. You know, here what we show are, if you look across, you know, a whole range of low and middle income countries, and you look at, okay, well, how many articles can we find that used the learning assessments and the basic education data that I highlighted in the previous couple slides? How many used those to do some analysis of girls' education to figure out, all right, what's the problem in Afghanistan or what's working in Afghanistan? And you can see there are a lot of countries in red where we just couldn't find any articles that people where people had analyzed these challenges in girls' education. And there are a lot of other countries in the very light beige where there's just maybe 1 or 2 articles, very, very few. And so there are just a lot of countries where we don't know very much about how to overcome challenges in girls' education. This is underlined in another piece of work just last month, a really excellent systematic review on what works to improve and expand girls' education came out from the Campbell collaboration by Saki and others. And so we looked at, you know, what countries, you know, they have a lot of recommendations of what works, and these come from evaluations of interventions to improve girls' education. And so we looked at, okay, well, what countries are these evaluations from? What countries are we learning from? And what you can see is from this map, you can see there are a lot of studies from India, a fair number of studies from, you know, China, Kenya, a few other countries in East Africa, and a lot of countries from which we're not getting any of these data. And so when we see these recommendations about what works to improve girls' education, these are really based on solutions that have been evaluated in just a small handful of countries. And what that means, that brings the countries that are lacking here are many of the lowest income countries, many countries that are post-conflict or in the midst of conflict. We know much less about how to help girls who have been displaced, or even just girls in countries where systems have been disrupted. We also find, even within evaluations, that most evaluations don't report impacts separately for girls. Now, this is a basic thing. If you evaluate the impact of a program, and, you know, I have yet to see, I've worked on a lot of impact evaluations. I have yet to see one that doesn't record the gender of the students at the same time that they record whether the students, increase their access to school or whether they increase their learning. And yet in 2/3 of these evaluations, we find that they don't actually tell us whether the impact is different for girls or for boys, or what the impact is for girls. So it's really difficult for us to learn what works for girls if studies aren't reporting what works for girls. And then, one positive move in some analysis, again, in this forthcoming report of World Bank education project documents, over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, they've tripled their reporting of disaggregated results by gender. So whether they're reporting, what happens for boys and girls separately, so we can really see what's working for girls' education, as well as for, where boys are falling behind. Okay, so there are a lot of challenges there. There's some evidence of progress. I'm going to talk a little bit in my last minute or two about solutions. And so one thing that Shada mentioned was the Open EMIS, which is a UNESCO initiative. There are several countries that have implemented this. This is basically a way of getting an education management information system to gather these basic data that doesn't cost any royalties, that countries can adapt. And there are a number of countries that have implemented this program. This is a practical, relatively low-cost solution to get the most basic data on, whether girls are in school, whether they're completing school. The second challenge that I highlighted was learning outcomes that we just don't know. So there are a number of countries that have implemented, again, relatively low cost, simple, low stakes assessments in early grades. So there's real value in understanding whether kids are learning to read, learning math in these first grades, second grade, third, fourth. So we know if they have the building blocks to then learn higher analytical skills, science skills, more advanced math skills. So there's a citizen-led assessment in East Africa and another in India. It's called Uwezo. It's been applied in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. It's called the ASER, the Annual Status of Education program in India that's been incredibly influential. They've both been implemented many, many times. So this is an option for countries that's relatively low cost. In Brazil, there's a program that's government sponsored rather than citizen led, the Provinha Brasil, which means the Little Brazil test. There's one for later grades called Prova Brasil, or the annual assessment of literacy, which is the ANA in Brazil. And so there are options for low stakes assessments that countries are implementing and that can be expanded. In terms of what works and how we learn what works, I think there are two pieces there. One is that we don't know enough from certain kinds of countries, like the lowest income countries. And so part of this will be, those are countries also that have the least infrastructure and the fewest resources to invest in evaluating programs. And so this is where, a lot of money for impact evaluation comes from international organizations like the World Bank, like the International 3IE, I don't remember what the 3IE stands for, but it's a major collective for impact evaluation. They can target resources to these countries where we lack information. And then on this last problem that a lot of evaluations simply don't report separated impacts, this is something that funders can mandate. So this doesn't have to be in the main table of a paper, but every paper can have an appendix table that reports impacts separately for girls and for boys. So there are solutions, they're being put in place, but there's still a long way to go. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dave, for highlighting those solutions, for highlighting that we're likely not going to be able to take this one-size-fits-all approach, given the data that you reflected on the variation across different countries of different income levels, those who are facing conflict and fragility. But that on the flip side, there's definitely cause for optimism, I think, that it is fairly low-hanging fruit if we already have data on sex or gender to be able to start to report these outcomes differentially. So very clear guidance and hopefully potential next steps for researchers and others to take forward and take seriously. We're going to move now along the life cycle a bit and switch gears. I'm going to turn over to Greta Bull, who is Director of Women's Economic Empowerment at the Gates Foundation. And Greta, as you know better than most, the solutions associated with improving data on women's economic opportunities and outcomes call for the increased production of gender data in the context of financial inclusion, among other areas. From your perspective, what will it take to improve data in this area that you've worked on for so many years? Over to you.
Thanks, Megan, and good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me here to support the launch of the latest gender data gap report from Data2X and Open Data Watch. I really enjoyed reading the report and would highly recommend to others who have an interest in gender data. For those who don't know me, I lead the Women's Economic Empowerment team within the Gender Equality Division at the Gates Foundation. And those who do know me, that I am a longtime devotee of financial inclusion and data in particular within the realm of financial inclusion. So this is a question that's near and dear to my heart. The Gates Foundation has worked on data in the financial inclusion space for many years and has supported demand side surveys like the Findex and FII surveys in a number of countries. And these have been really valuable resources for the financial inclusion community. And over time, I think they've really done a good job of incorporating a more robust gender lens. The Foundation's also been a long-time supporter of GSMA's State of the Industry report, which provides excellent sex disaggregated supply-side data on financial inclusion of women for the mobile money industry. But despite this coverage, we still have pretty big gaps in the supply side in an industry that is both changing rapidly and where much of that change is actually being driven by both data and technology. So in my view, the financial sector is like a prime place to really look at doing a better job on gender data. So at the Foundation, we see important new opportunities to fill data gaps in the financial sector that get us beyond access and usage and are really important to women's economic empowerment. Things like the availability of productive credit to female-owned enterprises, access to other services like savings and insurance, and social norms that relate to women's interaction with the financial sector, including fair treatment, which is a big topic, especially when you're dealing with credit. As we're shaping our approach to financial inclusion data, we see real opportunities to deepen gender data on both the demand and the supply side. On the demand side, we need to keep pushing to deepen the information we get out of benchmark surveys like the Findex, but also to extend the reach of demand side data and deepen the indicators that we use. And on the supply side, we still have pretty major gaps in what we know about, and there's a real opportunity to take what the GSMA has done and apply that to other parts of the financial system, like banks, like fintechs, getting regulators involved and involving the standard setting agencies as well, to build gender data into the work that we gather. So Data2X produced a really interesting couple of case studies on what countries like Chile and Mexico have done on this. There are other countries that have really strong data capabilities, and we'd love to see more of them incorporate a gender lens into what they're doing. But let's break this down a little bit and look at both the demand side and the supply side and where we see the opportunities. So a lot of progress has been made on filling data gaps on the demand side for financial inclusion, and that's mostly been done using population level surveys. So our partner Emerge, which is run out of UCSD, has been supporting this progress by building out measures on gender and financial inclusion. So we're all kind of using the same measures, and they're comparable across markets. They've been able to include questions on financial inclusion in the DHS, which is the single most reliable and commonly used survey for SDG indicators. Those surveys are going to be tested in India and Uganda, and they'll inform future DHS rounds, which provides a rich source of standardized data on women's financial inclusion. Expanding validated measures on women's financial inclusion is an important avenue for meeting gender data needs, leveraging existing approaches to data collection and further building on progress for gender data. Demand side data like the Findex provides an important window into women's barriers to accessing financial services, but within many countries, financial services providers rely on demand side data sets that exclude the unbanked population. And since almost 1 billion women remain unbanked, this approach results in instant gaps in our knowledge base on gender. The Women's Financial Inclusion Data Partnership has core recommendations on how to design surveys to ensure women are counted and that surveys are accounting for their realities. Solutions to these identified gaps in gender data will require consistently collected demand-side data to provide a comprehensive view of women's needs, making sure that we're reaching women who are unbanked and considering the range of barriers women face in accessing financial services. We're really excited to see that Open Data Watch and Data2X's report highlights the need for this kind of consistent and comprehensive data collection, and we're looking forward to helping build out that work. Finally, on the demand side, improving gender data to fill gaps will involve hearing from women themselves to best understand their wants, needs, and constraints. Engaging with women's groups has highlighted a key data gap needed to improve financial inclusion, which is understanding the way gender norms and financial inclusion interact. So in partnership with the Center for Financial Inclusion, our colleagues in the Financial Services for the Poor team have conducted a landscaping on the emerging evidence on norms and financial inclusion. Having data that allows us to understand the relationship between gender norms and financial inclusion is going to be vital to sustainably impacting women's financial inclusion and to ensuring that interventions are gender transformative. Incorporating gender norms into measurement frameworks on FI will build an evidence base that addresses the particular burdens and barriers that are faced by women. Turning to the supply side, we actually have a much steeper hill to climb, but we are beginning to flesh out a few ideas about how to fill this important gap. Solid supply side data is important for three reasons. First, it helps us validate what we're learning on the demand side. Happily, the Findex and GSMA's mobile money data largely track against one another. That tells us that the information that we're getting is solid and actually gives us a much more sort of three-dimensional picture about what's going on in terms of women's financial access to mobile money accounts. Secondly, it helps us to see where there are problems in access to financial services. So when Mexico and Chile started disaggregating financial sector data by sex, they could see the places where women were not being treated equally and they could take corrective action. This is equally true of efforts to ensure fair treatment and access to financial services. So I've seen a few instances where folks are working with market conduct authorities to ensure that not only access to services is equal, but that women are receiving these services on equal terms to men. In other words, in accordance with their risk as individuals, not paying a higher price or getting lesser terms simply because they're women. So supply side data just helps us to make better policy decisions. But finally, we need better supply side data because it helps show providers that they're leaving money on the table by not serving the women's segment. And when providers can see that there's a viable opportunity, they'll chase it. But if they can't see it, if we can't measure it, they can't see it. So the GSMA, which has already invested deeply in gender data, estimates that closing the gender gap in mobile access and use could generate a revenue uplift for the mobile industry of up to 37% in a typical low and middle income in Africa and up to 54% in Asia. That is a lot of money in an industry that is literally always looking for new ways to bolster its revenue. So this finding, among others, has resulted in around 40 mobile network operators signing on to initiatives that will help include more women. If we had this kind of deep sex disaggregated data in other parts of the financial sector, we would similarly be able to see the economic opportunity of serving women with financial services in those spaces. There are still many gaps on the supply side in the wider financial sector, including banks, SACCOs, cooperatives, fintechs. And here, regulators, I think, have a really important role to play. So as mentioned before, both Mexico and Chile have supported regulator-led gender data initiatives with promising results. We now need to get more regulators to track this kind of sex disaggregated data. And to do that, we have to have a really clear idea of what they're tracking it for. But there are also interesting examples of industry-led approaches out there too. So in the UK, industry came together to create the Investing in Women Code, which is a voluntary partnership that aims to increase women's access to financial services. The code's been used to signal commitment to the women's segment among banks, fintechs, and funds, and to improve transparency on the level of funding going to women, and to encourage financial inclusion, financial institutions to increase their support to women entrepreneurs. The code was incredibly successful at increasing institutional commitment to data. UK financial institutions representing more than 80% of the financial sector are now tracking sex disaggregated data on their own portfolios and have committed in parallel to improving reach to women entrepreneurs. They're reporting back on that every year. There's an important opportunity to translate this model to lower and middle income countries, and the World Bank's WeFi initiative is looking at ways to expand the code to emerging markets. And if we can successfully implement that, we can build on lessons learned to fill a much needed data gap from financial institutions in emerging markets. Beyond this, being able to compare supply-side data across countries on financial access and usage provides important insights to defining solutions and tracking progress. So the IMF's Financial Access Survey is a go-to source of information for people working on financial sector, and it uses administrative data to improve supply-side globally comparable data. They're using data collected by central banks and financial regulators to evaluate access to and use of financial services. However, only a small portion of the jurisdictions report this in a sexist aggregated way, and the survey is not kept up as much as I would have liked to have seen with the rapid pace of innovation in the financial sector in the last 10 to 20 years. We have a really important opportunity to expand global and comparable data by ensuring existing surveys have the support to collect, analyze, and track gender disaggregated data, and to evolve these data tools over time as innovation brings changes to the financial sector. So as digital financial services rapidly expand for women's financial inclusion, measuring financial inclusion will require a much better understanding of the relationship between DFS and women's economic empowerment. Improved gender data will build an evidence base on how to most effectively use digital financial services for women's financial inclusion. To this end, the Foundation's FSP team is working with BRAC and the We Define initiative to create data on DFS, we, and financial inclusion. We Define will generate a body of evidence on the causal relationships between DFS and we, and will support financial services providers to integrate gender into their work. Increasing production of data on digital financial services is an opportunity to strengthen our understanding of women's financial inclusion in an area of expanding importance. And measuring the causal mechanisms and effectiveness will set the stage for foundationally improving gender data on financial inclusion. We're also really excited about opportunities for innovating with big data sets that are generated by digital finance. And we've been thinking about what role we might play in this space. Big data offers a huge opportunity to use data that can drive women's financial inclusion through novel approaches. And emerging approaches to open data in places like the European Union and India opens up huge new opportunities for consumers to control their own data and take it with them to different providers who may be able to offer better terms and conditions. So if we can get more women into the DFS ecosystem, these new and emerging data aggregation methods have the potential to reach under and unserved groups of women, help us understand regional differences, and fundamentally gain a more comprehensive picture of financial systems. These new methodologies have to be implemented thoughtfully to avoid both bias and to protect women's data, but we're really excited about exploring the role that big data can play in filling crucial data gaps, while at the same time addressing and mitigating those concerns. So, for example, in India, we're exploring the role of creating digital solutions that engage women's savings groups. Within the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, our colleagues in India are supporting the development of specific data architecture called LOCOS for NRLM. What LOCOS does is gather data and credit histories of women who are participating in self-help groups and gathering that, managing it, and making that data interoperable so that it can be tapped into by emerging data aggregators that are being encouraged in the Indian ecosystem. So LOCOS is a model of improving data collection at source and has the potential to use digital to scale data collection on women's financial inclusion. These data can potentially enable data-driven decision-making at the national and state level missions. They can use credit histories to inform customized financial products and services, and they can improve community engagement through better profiling. So learnings from LOCOS are going to help inform how we can use digital solutions at scale in a market that is really pioneering this and helps us to reach deep into those women's communities through NRLM. So I'm really excited, obviously, about the state of gender data in the financial sector. And I think we're at a really key moment where different kinds of stakeholders can drive and push for both better production of gender data, but access to integrated and interoperable gender data. And we can both build on these emerging successes and fill major evidence gaps that are of highest priority to understanding women's financial inclusion. As we explore this new area for we, we're really eager to continue discussing and engaging with this community. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Greta. I think in speaking to two very different areas, you and Dave both have underscored how critical it is to continue to make progress in making the case, whether towards financial institutions or ministries of education. And I really appreciate you highlighting both the opportunities and the need for progress on the supply side and the demand side. You did a lot to speak to the supply side in particular in terms of what financial institutions need to pay attention to in order to just reach new clients and improve even their own bottom lines. And now in turning to Gero Carletto, I'm going to turn back to the demand side because nobody understands better than Gero some of these population level and household surveys. So Gero is the manager of the Data Production and Methods Unit in the Development Data Group at the World Bank. And Gero, surveys serve as a major resource, as we all know, in the gender data ecosystem. So how is the World Bank innovating its long-standing Living Standard Measurement Survey, the LSMS, to fill gender data gaps? Over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Can you see the slide?
We can see them.
We're good. Great. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. Obviously, I'm thrilled to be here. I want to apologize first for the overcrowded slides that I have, but I was trying to do justice to the many people who have been working on many of the things that I will be presenting today. So first, let me congratulate the authors of the report. I mean, a huge congratulations. I mean, Shada was saying I would be happy to see a household survey feature so prominently in the report. I'm actually thrilled, more than beyond happy. I mean, I think that it's the report clearly shows the role that the household survey can play in filling some of the gender gaps, but also there are like clear room for improvement, and this is what we have been working on at the LSMS with colleagues inside the bank and outside. But we're not here to talk about challenges, so we're here to talk about solutions. So I just want to briefly highlight in the next few minutes just a few areas of work that I think are part. I believe they are part of the solution, and all the work that I mean, a lot of this work has been driven. I mean, in the LSMS has been driven by two central tenets. So, and one is because we've been we heard a lot, and there is a lot in the report. About the lack of data and the underutilization of data, but I want to also to focus a bit on my remarks on the measurement agenda. So, and this is kind of two of the things that drives a lot of the work that we do in the LSMS. They've been doing the LSMS trying to fill some of the gaps, and basically what we some of these driving principles are like first and foremost that how we want to demonstrate, and we've been trying to demonstrate that how you measure it matters a lot, and then how we move from research to scalable solutions. And I will show. I think I will be able to show in the next few minutes kind of the evolution on how we have been trying to kind of this production cycle. I mean, how we move from finding a methodological solution to scaling up to countries and to a wider audience of users. So all this work, just the four areas which I will be mentioning today are the result of a 10-year kind of accumulation of a 10-year partnership with many of you, which are connected today, linking to work on ownership and rights of physical and financial assets, work and employment with ILO Data 2X, but also some of the work that we are currently doing as part of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys in partnership with UN Women and other agencies. So the four areas that I want to briefly mention today refer to one, a project which we started in 2016. Again, building on a lot of the research that we've been conducting, as I was saying before, together with partners, trying to find and refine the methodology, like the methodology on how to better measure economic opportunities and welfare for men and women. So this resulted culminated in the LSMS Plus, which is a project that was started in response to IDA 18 commitment to collect individual level data from direct respondent, directly from men and women, with an initial focus on employment and assets. So the project works on three main areas, both on the clearly on the data production and capacity building, working with national statistical offices in integrating some of the recommendations, some of the recommendation and standards. Is an active program of methodological research, which again resulted in a number of reports and publications that I will give a couple of snippets, a couple of points on the result, and of course, like the use of promoting policy research and dissemination to prove the value of the data, of the individual level data which have been collected. So the project, as I was mentioned, is in 6 countries. So it started in 6 countries, but I will show the next slides the evolution of this project in other countries. And it highlighted, well, it put a hard evidence, more than highlight, it put hard evidence on some of the differences, both in terms of employment and assets by gender. But also from the methodological standpoint, the project confirmed a lot of the earlier research on the importance of interviewing multiple respondents and not rely, as it is common practices practice in surveys, not rely on the most knowledgeable respondent, which often is the male head of the household. So, and what we showed through the project and consistently across countries is that the use of a proxy respondent leads to bias estimate. Again, as I was saying, how you measure it does matter. It is important. And if we want to inform policies, so like I mean, just we need to make sure that the underlying measurement, the underlying estimates are correct. But also in terms of this, I recommend it's the second paper. It's an hyperlinked paper. I recommend to take a look at it, which kind of links also to what Shada was saying about measurement of land, which is a main contributor to wealth inequality across countries, particularly in low and middle income countries. And once again, so what we were able to show that the use of a direct respondent leads to quite different measures of inequality. And another important findings is that the intra-household inequality counts as much as inter-household inequality. So these are kind of, I think they're important findings to guide kind of some of the policy discussions but of course the challenge which I will be referring to over and over during the presentation is the issue of scale. How do we go and achieve scale? The earlier presenters already emphasized the fact that in a lot of countries, particularly low-income countries, we're missing those data, but we're also missing those data following the proper standards, the proper methodologies. So it's the LSMS Plus provided a unique platform to scale up the findings and the recommendation in a number of countries. This is part of the through the Strengthening Gender Statistics Project, which is a project, a joint project with the Gender Group and the Poverty Global Practice with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the interesting aspect of this project is like how we've been trying to support a larger number of countries, again, through NSOs, in a more tailored way, in a way the target is to support the countries based on specific needs. You can see in the graph there. Again, I apologize for the too much information, but I think the presentation will be available, so you can go through it in due time. But the issue is that different countries have different needs. And through this project, we are supporting through technical assistance mostly, and improvement in the use and dissemination of the data, or the available data. So we're trying to strengthen existing systems more than build new ones. So the focus is on 12 IDA 19 countries, and if you visit the link, if you you will see, I mean, also from the map what the countries are. But again, what I want to show is that from the first phase of research to the second phase of the LSMS plus to the strengthening of gender statistics project is an evolution towards scaling up of common standards across countries in specific area. Of course, as already highlighted by many of the presenters before, there are many other areas that it needs to be addressed. One other area which I think it's, again, has been part of the solution, which is in a way was a bit of a forced solution because of COVID-19. So all of a sudden we were, because of travel restrictions and social distancing restrictions, all survey were halted. So basically, as of May 2020, like virtually every country has stopped either totally, completely, or partially household surveys. So there was this big shift at the bank, but also with any institution involved in household survey, shifting towards high frequency phone surveys with the main objective, at least initially, to address some of the data needs to monitor the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. But also, as Emily mentioned before, like we just have, so there is as highlighted in the report, there's also a need, an increasing need for deploying rapid data collection, that rapid data collection mode. So just to give a scale of the effort, the bank has been supporting more than 100 countries in implementing phone surveys. But the point I want to make here, again, apologies for raising a concern, but also on the positive side, proposing some of the solution. So if we want to use a phone survey as one of the solutions to fill some of the gender gaps, we need to address some of the constraints, some of the limitations, which has to do with coverage. Like, I mean, fewer women, which can was shown, fewer women on phones than men. Non-response biases, like we just said, women tend to be often respond less to unsolicited calls. But also the need, kind of related to the coverage issue, the need for better sampling frame, which includes not only, because a lot of the frames that we use include the contact information of the male head of the household, as you can see from the graph on the left. And unless we address these issues, like the potential of phone surveys moving forward, it will be a much limited. But we have been working towards finding some of the solutions, and through, for example, recalibration. But for individual level estimates, I mean, we see, at least from the work that we've been doing, that a calibration, reweighting for calibration has also its own limitation. So this is why moving forward that we're focusing more. Also, there's been some interesting work by the Gender Innovation Lab on improving on the way we select respondent and phone surveys to include more women. Very quickly, another interesting area of great potential is the use of new technology like activity trackers or smartphone apps to collect time use data. There's a lot happening, like just both in our team, but also in several other teams, like just UN Women has been doing quite a bit of work on that. But once again, like you just said, I think there is a lot of potential. We're showing a lot of potential. It's part of the solution, but there is some work that remains to be done before scaling up. One last area which I want to highlight, which is kind of fits quite nicely with some of the recommendation of the report, is the launch of the revamped gender data portal. So I strongly encourage everyone to visit the website and so the new revamped gender data portal includes a lot of new features that makes accessing the more than 900 indicators much easier. It's also one of the objective of the revamping was to be able to reach to also non-technical audience through compelling communication styles, visualization, stories. I think this is also something which is kind of unique in the new as part of the new features. But also there's a lot of added features in terms of search functions and navigation, search and navigation functions. So there's also different ways to pull out to access the data by country, by region. So again, I strongly encourage everyone to visit the website. Moving forward, the only point I want to make, so we are fully aligned with many or most or all of the recommendation of the report. And as LSMS, as the bank, we're fully committed to help in scaling up some of those solutions. And we're already working with many of you already here, some examples of ongoing and future work. But just to conclude, in line with what Shada was saying, she loves to talk about financing. And I think whether we like it or not, we need we need financing. We need to talk about financing. And I think this is where also the bank has been working actively to provide, to try to also in collaboration with Paris 21 and with other partners, to provide the mechanism, the facilities to be able to scale up a lot of this innovation and a lot of this solution. So we hope that the work on that front will continue. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Megan, and thanks again to the organizer.
Thank you so much, Gero. It's excellent to hear about the alignment between the report's recommendations and the work that LSMS and broader data teams at the bank are already taking forward. Really interesting to hear about the innovations in the COVID context, which I hope we'll be able to circle back to during discussion. And not just how you've harnessed your own tools at the World Bank Group, but how you're working to build local capacity through this technical assistance being provided to national statistical offices. So thank you so much for highlighting all of those points. Before we do get into discussion, last but not least, I want to introduce our fourth and final panelist. Mushiri Niaga is the Executive Director of Local Development Research Institute. Mushiri, as you know, improved production of gender data does not guarantee its continued demand and use. So from your perspective, what actions can encourage stakeholders to come together to create more of a culture of data use for evidence-based policy formulation and impact. We're going to switch from the production and the generation that many have spoken about to making sure it's actually taken up and used. Over to you.
Yeah, switching over to the boring stuff. I always find the data generation side of things so much more exciting. But just to probably give you a little background. So first of all, thank you, Megan. Thank you to CGD and Open Data Watch, Data2X and partners for inviting me to say a few words. I think the solutions inventory just adds a valuable bit into the body of knowledge on what solutions are available and what is available to use, what's available to learn from, as we try and really do something about the gap that we're seeing in terms of availability of gender data vis-a-vis the non-gendered type data within even the same framework. In this case, looking at the SDGs. So LDRI, so Local Development Research Institute, LDRI, we're an action-oriented think tank. We're 7 years old, based in Nairobi, Kenya. We conduct research and capacity building to support African countries to close the gap on hunger, poverty, and inequality. But we also have a very specific focus on exploring new sources of data, adoption of new technologies in the context of decision making in development. So we do work in open government quite a bit, supporting open data. It's been one of the areas we've worked in for a long time. So the areas around transparency and accountability, especially in the use of evidence in policy making and measuring impact, is really one of those areas that we've spent quite a number of years looking at. And although we do a great deal now also on inclusive access to services for rural farmers, especially in the context of agricultural input and services, we do see this correlation, this nexus between the open government and the accountability side we've always worked on, and the food and nutrition security side, where we see a lot of the challenges we're facing, especially those that face women and girls, being very amplified in rural settings, and consequently the absence of the relative invisibility of women and girls in the data that we've been looking at over the last few years. So a lot of data, a lot of open data in our context in Africa has been, for the most part, proactively released. Right. So the idea that it is important to improve demand and use is really key, because those who are stepping out, taking chances, being adventurous, putting out data, that proactive disclosure component, it really makes it encouraging for them when they see the data being used. So when it's not used by their own peers in government or outside of government, the motivation to continue, trudging along and doing almost a thankless job in some instances, really begins to dissipate. So that's just to say, the need for making sure that we are accompanying our supply side efforts with this demand catalyzation. That becomes a really, really important thing to build in to the work that we're doing going forward. But I think you might remember a few months ago, I was talking about, in one of the Gender Data Network event about the my acronym. It provides for me a framework I call CPU, right? You have your champions, your purpose, and your utility. And those three, I think, are an important framework to use when looking at this particular issue of how do we encourage a data culture use? How do we maintain that demand and use of data? So 3 actions, right? So action 1. I think it's important to deliberately build in measures to identify and support champions. Champions within the public sector. And here I'm talking mostly about the supply side, about the public sector side. And I think this probably works on any other institution as well. If you support champions who are really driving and pushing for evidence-informed decision making, and I'm talking about building in the measures that support them, measures around policy, measures around financial resources, that becomes very key for driving sustainability and institutionalization of whatever reforms and ideas and innovations your champions come up with within the context of your government or your institution. I see champions as being important vectors, right? They carry an infection. They carry an infection of data use. They're the ones that set an example. They make everyone excited. They make everyone want to be like them. To visibly use data and tell data stories and essentially spread this culture of data use, and bringing along with them not just that excitement, but the enabling environment for it, which includes what I was talking about, the policy reforms, whatever other remedies that might come along with trying to make sure that data is available, is usable, and it is being used. So that's for me the first thing. It has to do with the C, the champions, right? So action one, deliberately implement measures to identify and support champions for evidence informed decision making. The second action, I think, is really important, and one that I think addresses the issue I talked about a little bit earlier. When you have a context where a lot of data that's being made open is being proactively made open just based on the good nature of the publisher, it means that when officers change from one office to another, that excitement, that willingness goes away, or is at risk of going away. So whatever data we might have gone out and checked using
I think
am I back?
you are back. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, for a minute there, I got a message that I wasn't quite here. So I was talking about action two and the fact that we need to address that issue of a policy or regulatory lacuna, or maybe even a human resource level, job description level issue of the mandate around opening up data, so that when officers change, when offices change, that data is still available. So if you run the Odin report this year and you run it next year, if the data was available last year, it will probably be available the following year, because there's a mandate around it and a mandate around the office that makes it available. In some instances, the data pops up and pops away because the individual who was responsible for it or who was making themselves responsible for it is no longer there. So mandating the openness of the underlying data, especially the underlying data for the policy or the regulation, or whatever it is that is being pushed forward, is vital for a couple of reasons. One, it encourages those who are making the policies, who are creating the rationale behind some remedies, to put out their evidence in a way that other people can use it and arrive at the same conclusion, or arrive at a better conclusion that would save the public sector money and time and get the job done. When that data becomes available in that way, people tend to jump on it, to use it, to find ways of innovating around it. We saw a lot of this in the past around budget data, but I don't think we're seeing it much beyond that even now, maybe in the health sector. And these are areas where I think we really do need to do a little bit more work around, in terms of making sure that the purpose that we're putting out that data with is solidly grounded in policy, in legislation, strengthening the institutions that are supposed to be doing it, so that data is available this year and is available next year for those who are actually trying to get something done with it. So mandating the policy users to policy owners to put out that data that they're using, I think, is one of the actions that could be really important in terms of drive. Third action is to maximize utility. So this is an area that those of us who've been working in open data probably have had a refrain over time, that you need to make the data open in ways, in formats that can be used and reused and and repurposed. And this is really still quite key, because if we continue putting out data that doesn't quite address the pain that people are trying to address, if that data doesn't fit the purpose for which people are trying to get a job done with it, then there'll be no use. There'll be little use, and anything that we try to do will simply fall flat because the utility of the data isn't lining up with the ambitions of the data users or the objectives that they've actually set out to try and address. So those three actions for me are really key if we have to not just advance availability of data for development, but specifically availability of gender data, because there's a big gap in terms of what's available and what's not. If you look at the Odin gender index from introduced in last year's report, you'll see that those curves just keep getting away from one another, and it's not getting any better. I'm hoping that the work that our partners are doing, the World Bank, Global Partnership and others, will help close that gap as we move forward. So support champions and their reforms, mandate openness, and the third thing, maximize the utility of data. Those are the three actions that I'd say would drive data use and increase a culture of openness. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Mushiri. Very succinct, very clear. I think 3 action items for all of us to take on board. Now what I'm going to do is ask the rest of our panelists to join me back on video if they're able. We have just about 6 minutes for questions, so I will ask you all to be very succinct as Mushiri has been in his latest comments, but I do want to get a chance to get all of your perspectives if possible. As Shada concluded her presentation, we saw that slide of 10 priority actions or recommendations that are needed. And I would love each of your reflections on the most important one from your particular perspective or vantage point. Greta, maybe we start with you on number 1. As we know, the Gates Foundation has been such a critical player in gender data financing. And then let's move back to Mushiri on open data, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick on this, although it's not a very easy topic. I think we all on this call would agree that sex disaggregated data is really important for better policymaking, for better business, for lots of different reasons. But it's expensive and it's a long haul, and for the data to be useful, it needs to be produced over a long period of time, right? So the Gates Foundation in 2016 announced an $80 million commitment to close gender data gaps, and we've seen a lot of important progress since then, but there's still a lot to do. And so it remains an important challenge, and we really need to be crowding others in. And that's for both resources on global survey work being done, but also in-country capacity building and just building up that muscle on doing better gender data in national statistics offices, but also in the private sector. So I think this is a huge lift, and we need to bring others into this a lot more, because we're not going to get to a more sustainable gender data system without a group of funders coming together. So we're looking at ways that we can start doing this, but I think it's gonna take a lot of time, and it's gonna be a heavy lift.
Good for us to all be realistic about what's needed, right? That this will be costly, but it will be cost effective and efficient and necessary investment. Mushiri, let's turn back to you. Obviously, Shada and others have highlighted the importance of open data. That was one of your calls to action for this community. Anything else you want to reflect on that point, how we ensure the openness of data?
Yes, Megan, I think the one thing that I have found to be extremely important in just about any country, whether you're looking at the Gender Data Network and the members there, or the Open Data Charter, or any one of those efforts, is the presence of a high-level champion who can provide that support, that political support, in order for those resources to become available. And I think the fact that our conversations on data availability and use are happening in many of our countries, in lower middle income countries and least developed countries, happening in a context of constrained resources, it means that those competing priorities can seem so sometimes insurmountable that adding the additional complexity of measurement and data can easily put off a lot of people who might not see, senior people in government who might not see the need for that additional investment, despite the catalytic impact it has on resource allocation and smart decision making. So I think making sure that we are finding ways of bringing on board the kind of champions who can deliver political will, political support, I think is extremely important. And that political support for me is also tied to the value of bringing in institutions that have an oversight mandate already. And here I'm talking about parliamentarians. I feel we're not seeing enough parliamentarians in our data space. And I think they have a big role to play in terms of pushing back on the executive, especially when resource requests come to Parliament. They stand in a pretty good place to say, hey, we can't see investments in measurement, can't see investments in measuring progress, and we cannot see investments in making data available. I think those are one of the areas where we still haven't moved as much as we could, and I think that's an area we should put some additional focus and attention on.
Thanks, Mashiri. So it's going to take financial investment. It's going to take political will. Dave and Jero, to close us out, what about innovative methods? You've touched now on the COVID pandemic and the need to get creative about how we collect data. Dave, do you want to comment on what the CGD education team has done in that context? And then over to Jared for the last word.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, there has been a lot of innovation in collecting education data over the course of the pandemic. A lot of phone surveys, a lot of surveys by text. It seems like these can be quite effective for gathering data on education participation, time spent on education. We've seen a lot of data from a lot of countries. Where I think we're still learning, but when all the research is said and done from this, is whether or not we can actually assess learning by phone and by text. And the Center for Global Development team did some work in Sierra Leone, and the experience was pretty mixed. A Sierra Leonean researcher did some great qualitative complementary work that demonstrated that a lot of cases, maybe a parent would say, the answer is 7, with these phone-based surveys. It's really difficult to get ideal assessment conditions in that context. There are some other places, Botswana, Kenya, where we've seen some more promising results. So I think by the time all the research projects that have started during the pandemic come out, I think we'll have a much clearer set of guidance of where we can actually do learning assessments by phone, how to do that well, and where we can expect that to deliver useful, actionable knowledge to help kids the next time schools have to close. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jero, final
Yeah.
reflections on innovative methods or other top priority recommendations.
A lot of responsibility, since I say that you remember the beginning and the end of every of every conversation. So now on the innovation side, clearly we are, like just as a LSMS, but bank-wide. I think there is a lot happening. But as I mentioned a couple of examples on the use of technology, we're moving towards the use in surveys of more direct measurement, kind of using technology as a way also of validating self-reporting, which is often plagued with the larger measurement error. So like the use of technology is your friend, but also it needs to be checked. It needs to be kept in check, because it's not always a solution. We're working, but one point that I want to make, I want to make a 2 quick points. One is the word that Greta used extensively, interoperability. We need to stop talking about one single data sources, and we need the methods to be able to better connect and link, for example, how we've been using household surveys to validate, to calibrate through ground truthing, remote sensing data, how we can use surveys or phone surveys, just for similar purposes for big data. So how to calibrate and reweight, just social media data. This is to me is the the frontier that we're still kind of scratching. One last point, if I may, which is not related to the question, but I think it's I just want to throw a challenge there as a possible solution. Which links to something that Mushiri repeatedly say, the champion, the champion, the champion. So the challenge I want to throw to the group is it's not about using a champion which is already there, which is already convinced. It's about converting a champion. So you want to convert somebody who is not convinced that closing the gender gap, data gap, is important. That is, I think, much more impactful than to preach to the convert, to talk to somebody who are already convinced that gender data is important. And I think to me, that is the real challenge: how to convert the unconverted. And I think it's time we start with that. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. And it's a great way to end this discussion, a call to action for all of us once we wrap up talking to one another, to go and talk to some people who aren't convinced or who don't even know what gender data is yet. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us virtually today, for sharing your experiences and your expertise. We are extremely grateful. I'm going to turn now to my colleague Myra Buvanich, who is Senior Fellow at both CGD and Data2X, to close us out.
Thank you, Megan. And I will not try to summarize because it has been an incredibly rich discussion. And the report, Shada and ODW and Data2X is amazing. I mean, 142 solutions is just great. I would just want to pick up a few of the solutions that the panelists mentioned that I think are really important. And I will start with Mushiri. And, sort of establishing this virtuous cycle between use and production is critical. And as you said, champions, and I agree with Jero, you have to find new champions. But I think the role of champions, one of the things that was very clear, and Greta mentioned it, the Women Finance Code in the UK was led by a champion. That's how it started. And it really has, will have incredible ripple effects. And I want to continue with financial inclusion and Greta. I mean, it's a big topic, I think, for us. It has been for a long time. The issue of how to improve supply side data and the opportunity, and it's great that the foundation has picked it up to use big data now to really harness big data, particularly because in the financial sector, mobile phone operators and the non-traditional banks are really prevailing and are the ones where women are really also accessing it. So thank you so much for underscoring that and for working on the supply side of improving the supply side for financial inclusion data. And, Jero, I really appreciated your concern about sampling frames, particularly for phone related data, how they can be biased, and all efforts that the bank and the institutions are trying to sort of get best practices to draw these sampling frames. It's really important. And I was so glad to hear that you guys are aligned with the recommendations of the report and that you will sort of use them to scale up, because scaling up clearly is a big issue in all this work on data. And and with David, it's amazing how you sort of what we thought there would be data, basic data in girls' education, and here we are, in the 21st century, and we still don't have that data. But I think your call, and as you say, very simple solutions in terms of getting funders to require that the sex disaggregated data that is at any rate collected get reported. That is critical. And I've always been struck by the fact that you read all these reports on impact, randomized controlled trials, impact evaluations, and they never sex disaggregate. They don't report disaggregated by sex. So that is terribly important. And I think you mentioned something else that I think if we can have get funders to diversify the types of countries that they're doing work on, so we can really cover a lot more countries. So anyway, so going back to the report itself, and the 10 priority actions, I wanted to just highlight an incredibly important one, that is to foster and expand collaborations between agencies. And I think that we here today are an example of that, because the partnership between the Center for Global Development, between Data2X and between Open Data Watch has produced now this event. And also I just want to mention that we have just, the three organizations, we have just published a blog at CGDE and Data2X and ODW, because we're producing guidelines on transparency guidelines for women's economic empowerment related indexes. And it is this kind of collaboration between the organizations, I think, that is one that will push the needle forward in terms of finding, reliable, harmonized data. So I want to end sort of looking a bit ahead and what the organizations are going to be doing. CGD, Data2X, and ODW, we're going to be continuing to push for these guidelines and socialize these guidelines. And hopefully, at some point, we will be able to extend the work on transparency and openness beyond just women's economic empowerment related guidelines for indexes. With FinEquity, CGD and Data2X, we are working on putting together a core set of indicators on women's economic empowerment for financial inclusion. So, and that I think is going to be really significant. And there we are building on the work of the Women Financial Inclusion Data Partnership that Data2X has been coordinating for a number of years. I want to just also mention ODW. They have an open data inventory, and the upcoming open data inventory will have a stronger focus on the openness of gender data. That is, I think, is something that is critically important, as Shada was saying. CGD's work, I mean, as we have seen from Dave, but it will extend work on gender data, on cash, care, and across all the areas of CGD work. And I just want to acknowledge the important work that CGD is doing on ID for development and, sex disaggregating that data. And finally, it's 10 years of anniversary of Data2X. It's unbelievable that it has been already 10 years. And we really are looking forward to the state of the gender data report that Emily already mentioned, that will be launched in this 10th year anniversary. And I want to congratulate the organizations, and I particularly want to congratulate Data2X on its 10-year anniversary, and thank Emily for her leadership on Data2X over these 10 years. It's amazing that the 10 years have gone by so quickly. I have had the pleasure and the privilege of working with Emily for the 10 years, and it has been really an incredible fun ride. So I have learned a lot from Emily. I have enjoyed working with her, and I have gained a friend. So, thank you, Emily, for all that you have done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everybody. And I think with this, I turn to you, Megan, to close the event.
Nothing like a good cry at the end of an event, Megan.
We wish you the very, very best. Thank you all for your time today. We're just going to say thank you once again and sign off. Thank you.
Thank you.